Welcome to Scope Creep, the show that shines a light on what it's actually like to build a business, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm Jamie Cox.
And I'm Liz Talago, and we're both entrepreneurs in the business of building businesses. Every other week, we'll dissect the myths behind being a solopreneur, call out the celebrity entrepreneurs who push the passive income dream, and talk about the real benefits of being your own boss, from choosing how and when you spend your free time to building a career where you call the shots.
Let's take a #unfiltered look behind the proverbial curtain and learn how to build a values-based business where you're healthy and wealthy. No manifestation or vision boards required.
Welcome to the premiere of Scope Creep. I'm sure you've seen the solopreneur posting about their 5th vacation this year. Or maybe you've heard about the 7-figure business coach who never actually ran their own business. But have you heard about the content strategist with rustbelt roots? That's me. Or how about the brand strategist who spent the majority of her childhood feeding bottle calves?
That's me.
Today, we're talking about how we were raised to think about work and why we flip that on its head to build businesses for ourselves. Really, we just want to know, why are we like this?
But before we dive in, it's happy hour, and we are spilling the tea on how our weeks actually went, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So Liz, what went really well for you this week?
Oh, well, this one is a little bit of a double-edged sword. I have to say that I did a hard thing, and I held a boundary with a prospective client who wanted me to do some free spec work, aka free labor. And there are a lot of things that are wrong with that model, but as tempting as it was to say yes to what could have been a pretty lucrative deal, I held the line and we're still going to work together. So that went pretty well.
Yeah, I love that it worked out that you guys are still going to work together. So that's exciting. Well, while I wasn't on my 5th vacation this year, I did take a vacation last week.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first one that I've taken in a hot minute. And so again, double-edged sword a little bit. I got to unplug and truly just I needed that. I'd been working really hard on a few projects that were really pulling it out of me. And so just kind of unplugging and truly getting away and turning off Slack, all of that was really good for me. And it's felt really good to be back in the office and being productive again with a new kind of out lease on life and just a refreshed start. So it's nice.
I love that for you.
What about the down points? I know I have about 80 of them a week.
So speaking of vacations, I have been on 0 vacations this year, and I was supposed to be in Mexico with my fiance to do exactly what you did in Vegas this past week. But when you have a 120-pound German Shepherd that just had joint surgery and requires at-home physical therapy 3 times a day, it'll really put a damper on your travel plan. So I am home being dog mom first and foremost to my sweet boy who's struggling a little bit post-op. So didn't get to go on that vacation, but I'm glad I get to be here and be home with him.
Yeah, hopefully it gets put back on the books too. We all need it every now and then. So, well, I'll say that my downside is also coming back from vacation. Before we started recording, we were talking about the amount of work we committed to maybe when things were slow. So I'm dealing a little bit with that still, just coming back from vacation and a week off, playing a lot of catch up. I just made it through my email inbox and it is Thursday. So it's a process.
I hear that. And I feel that in my bones. It's that time of year. Everything's ramping up.
Yes. It's a roller coaster as far as you can have the good, oh, I got to go out of town, but then there's always something else right after that that's I'm back, baby.
So true. So true.
All right, Liz, let's get into it. Why the hell are we like this? And by this, we mean the antithesis of every celebrity entrepreneur and business influencer out there who's yeah, you can live this passive income life and never have to work a day in your life. I wish.
Lies.
So why did we feel the need to leave the corporate hellscape and to start our own businesses? Why did we make a pivot and leverage our experience to build a career that actually made sense for us? Oh my gosh, who would have thought? We're sharing a few things from our past that shape the way we approach running our own business and just kind of the daily life that comes with that. So Liz, you said you grew up in the Rust Belt. I am just curious if you can kick us off with how you think that shaped how you think about work today.
Ooh, that is a great question. Yes. So I am from one of those They're kind of a dime a dozen in that area, but a town that used to have like a thriving main street and there were good jobs and industry closed down and the neighborhood did not stay the same. People lost their way of making a living and it had an impact on the community in a big way that was not so good. A lot of folks struggling. My family was touched by that personally. And so I know this is like making me sound super old, but it was a tough thing to watch even as a kid. And the way that I think about that experience of watching people who depended on this institution, right, to keep their families fed, all of a sudden that's not there anymore. What the hell are we going to do? That was my first and probably most profound example of institutional failure. So, like, what do you do when this big machine literally shuts down and you've got to figure it out on your own? And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it, right? Like I couldn't look at the situation and think to myself, well, surely I'll be able to totally trust my employer one day to take good care of me because I'd seen firsthand that that's not always going to be true. So that planted a seed inside my brain. And really, it just kept happening throughout my life. As that neighborhood changed, we started to be able not to really rely on law enforcement to show up when we had a problem. So that was another institution that failed me, right? And so I just kind of had this more critical eye, I think, for a very small, probably too big for my britches little person, where I just started to question systems. I started to question, the way things are and who you can trust versus trusting yourself. And I think that mindset and that kind of like philosophical worldview, it took me into my career and it gave me confidence in myself that no matter what was happening in the job market or the economy, like I wanted to put the most stock in myself and trust myself. And that has really served me as a business owner.
And you mentioned like seeing things fail around you and just like questioning, like, how can I expect to have this big machine or corporate thing take care of me? I don't know. That really speaks to me on another level. So I grew up in the Midwest, super small town, and I've just always had this sort of like questioning mindset. And it was like, I think, and I don't know how big or small your town was, but where I grew up, it was kind of like, these are the things that are expected of you. It was the 90s. I mean, like, you're in a small town. These are the things that we want from you. These are the things that you are going to do when you get older, when you're in school, whatever that is. And I just kind of always had this like thing in the back of my mind that was like, why would we do that? So I feel like being put in a box and then having to like figure out how to get out of that in kind of your environment where maybe that's not you, like you don't see those same opportunities happening around you. Like most people similarly worked like blue collar jobs where I lived. And it was just like, well, I mean, I guess that's just what people do, but I mean, there has to be more.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I can totally relate to that. I think it's also like just growing up in like the middle America, you kind of just have that experience that, and you don't have access to a lot of the same things like people in big cities do. And like I said, that like you don't see other people building things or corporations that are, I mean, in the 90s, you didn't really see corporations treating anybody great.
Well, we are today, but as you're talking about that, something that comes up for me is that while we didn't grow up in the same town or the exact same environment, we kind of grew up aware of the boxes.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, maybe it was the moon we were born underneath. I don't know, but you're looking around your small town thinking like, oh, like there's this pre-planned path for me and starting to question that. And I'm looking at my situation thinking like, here's this box, which was more like a container that was supposed to take care of everybody, and the box broke.
Yeah. And now what?
Now what? Yeah. You're kind of like the little Jamie's kind of like, I don't know about this box stuff. And I'm like, well, shit, the box is on fire. Now what are we going to do?
Yes.
It's really interesting to me.
Yeah. And I think too, like the expectations that I had, that other people had of me when I was a kid too. I think there were like the expectations environmentally of like what is common in the community I grew up in and like what other people typically did. And then there was also like the expectations from my family. My family, none of them were from the small town that we grew up in. Like we were, I don't know if I would call us transplants, but like we weren't related to other people in our town like a lot of people were. But anyway, I think like they had a certain expectation of me and my sisters to, like go on and like be great students. We were all great students. Like we had the expectation to like go to college, be really successful at whatever it was we were going to do. I think my sisters are both like literal doctors. So they kind of followed that path, and they're both amazingly talented, incredibly smart. And I just always come back to this time. I was riding in the car with my mom, and I had planned on being a vet. This was when I was in like high school. I had planned on being a vet, and it was like, oh my gosh, Jamie's going to be a vet. Like everybody was like, wow, cool. And everybody in the community is like, wow, Jamie's going to college. I mean, more people went to college too, but anyway, and I was like, oh wow, I really hate science. Like, why am I doing this? So I actually decided I was going to go into the business school at my college, which I don't know, looking back, I'm just like, oh, wow, glad I didn't do that. But my mom, we were riding in the car and she was like, Jamie, have you ever thought about going to like do design? Like you seem really interested in that and like good at it. And I was like, holy shit, there are other things I can do besides these things that are expected of me. And my mom is the one telling me this. So like, I don't know, that's just something I remember like realize, like the world exploded that day when I was like, oh shit, I don't have to go be like a doctor, lawyer, business executive.
Yeah.
Like I can go do something else. So thanks, Mom.
And it makes sense to me. One, props to your mom for having that insight and saying that to you and kind of opening that door for you. And two, like we said in the intro, like you literally grew up bottle feeding calves, right? Like this,
Yeah.
this is not a myth. This is something that you actually spent time doing. So like I can totally see where maybe some of the veterinary interest came in.
Yes.
But I feel like I can relate to this. There's got to be at that point in your life when you're trying to figure out like, where do I go to school and what do I want to study? Like this kind of divide between that experience and then thinking about going to business school and trying to make sense of all that, being like 17 or 18 or whatever it was, I imagine.
I had two older sisters who had kind of like done this stuff before. Like they had gone to college. They're older than me. They're like 5 and 7 years older than me. So they had mostly been through all of these experiences that I was currently going through. And I know you are the oldest, correct?
Yes, I am. I'm the oldest in my immediate family. I have a younger brother and sister, shout out Em and Aaron. And then I'm also the oldest of a boatload of first cousins in a big Polish Catholic family.
Oh yeah.
So I think birth order matters a ton. I think we don't talk about it enough. And, for me being this kind of type A little person who was already like critiquing authority, I was also put in charge of things very early on. Whether that was babysitting or helping my mom or my aunts, like there was just a lot of kids and the moms were spread pretty thin. The dads were off working. And so as the oldest, I kind of got put in a bit of a parentified situation. I'll say that. But I think it's another thing that has kind of led into my can do kind of, I can do things for myself mindset, which I definitely still rely on like literally every day trying to battle it out as a business owner.
I agree that birth order definitely plays into it. And I think it's interesting, oldest and me, the youngest, I feel like the reason I'm so like, no, I have to do it or like I have to take charge or take the lead or whatever that looks like is because I am the baby and because I was babied as a baby. Like,
own it.
Oh, yes. And there's some like pull for me and always has been for like, no, I can do it myself. I can like, let me show you. I'm going to prove that I can do it myself. So it's like, again, similar to the box conversation, like it's opposite ends of the spectrum, but kind of meeting in the middle there.
Yeah. Sounds like we were both just really paying close attention to what was going on around us. And I know kids are like sponges. Kids are absorbing things all the time. But in looking back, like it really just sounds like, man, if you and I would have met in preschool, what we could have accomplished at that early age. Because I know you've talked about part of where your present day attitudes about work come from watching your parents and how they work and their legacy.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we talked about, I grew up on a cattle farm in Indiana and I watched my dad work all the time, still to this day. He's working all the time. He is retired, but he still works all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So he worked full time for the government for like, I don't know, like 35 years or something. And he also worked full time managing a cattle farm where we lived. So just seeing him like work on and off the clock was really, I just feel like instilled that level of work ethic in me. And then my mom, she worked a lot of different jobs too. She went back to school and got her master's degree as like a non-traditional student when she was, I guess it was probably when I was in middle school or high school. So also just seeing her kind of like make this big career pivot. She was a nutritionist before, and then she became a librarian. So like seeing her kind of make that career transition in the middle of all of this, like in the middle of life and raising kids too, was just like, for me, really empowering. And it was like, oh, it again broke that idea of the box. Like, oh, just because everybody in our community like has this kind of small town mindset of like, yeah, this is it, doesn't mean that I had to keep that mindset. I think that's really just helped me, like, I don't know, disconnect from that a little bit and kind of break my worldview. So
I think going through like preparing for this episode and thinking about this process, I have, I don't know, gained a deeper appreciation for some of the decisions my parents made that didn't make sense to me when I was a kid. Of course, obviously, we have lots of those, but it's apparent to me that our parents were kind of caught in this in between watching their parents and kind of the more like 1950s, 60s home life structure into the 80s and 90s when they were raising us. There was a lot of change. And while parts of my upbringing were, very traditional and patriarchal, my mom stayed home until we were in high school. And then she worked at our schools, and my dad worked outside the home, but neither one of my parents ever had a traditional corporate job. So there was a lot of tradition and structure built in that seems pretty old school. But at the same time, like, when those steel mills closed up, my dad was always working. He had a nursery business on the side, like your dad, just work, 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 work. But he made a conscious decision at some point to change the way he was working so that he could be around us kids more. And that was at a time where like most dads weren't doing that. And I'm really grateful for that. It meant that financially, we struggled a little bit more than I think we would have otherwise, but he was around. And I think that was my first example, of course, getting to be a teenager, that's not such a cool idea anymore, but it is my first example of like, oh, here's a person thinking about their life, thinking about their values, thinking about what matters and building work around that instead of the other way around. It was not all sunshine and rainbows, but like I said, in preparing for this episode, like, man, that really hit me in a deeper way. And pausing to think about some of this stuff, I don't know. Maybe it makes me appreciate all the parents more.
oh yeah, definitely. And I feel like too, I mean, you mentioned like, it sounds like your parents are probably similar age to mine, like baby boomer parents. And it's like, I mean, it's no secret. Baby boomers, y'all work hard. We know.
Yep.
And you'll always have. And I think all of us as like elder millennials, I think is what we're called.
Yeah.
I think we all kind of saw that and saw, I don't know, the sacrifices they made and maybe just thought like, I don't know if that's the thing I want. And it like broke the idea of how much do you actually have to work to build a life that you enjoy living. Like it's that kind of the idea of like working to live versus living to work. Now, have I been in live to work mode? Absolutely. This week, I feel like I'm in that. But also, I do really try to shift that and kind of rethink like, oh, what actually did influence me to feel like value comes from my work? And then being like, oh, I can actually work to live a life I enjoy. Like I'm making money so I can go on a vacation and take a break from work.
Exactly. You're living your values, your priorities.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of people who see, I'm sure like me, many times someone has come up to you and said, oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky to work the way that you do. And, usually that results in me gritting my teeth and thinking, thinking some maybe unkind thoughts. But because, when you go on Instagram and you see these celebrity entrepreneurs who are running their values first business and having all this passive income, they're not telling the whole story. They're not telling this story. They're not talking about all the messy parts that went into them having or not having whatever it is that they proclaim to be about today. And you and I think yeah, we have these really interesting upbringings that maybe planted some seeds along the way, but that wasn't enough for us to forego corporate life and go right into solopreneurship.
Right.
I think maybe it's generational, but I know for me, I wouldn't be where I am in my own business today had I not gone through the corporate trenches, right?
I totally
And I
agree.
know you've had a similar experience.
Yeah. As much as I'm getting ready to take a big fat dump on a lot of like the corporate experiences,
Yes.
I also, just on the front of this, I want to say some of those experiences I really appreciate because I mean, I did learn a ton and I am 100% certain I could not run the business I run now
Same.
without those experiences, whether they were good learning experiences, good just general experiences, or like terrible, I never want to do this again experiences. And I think all of those kind of play into the work I take on, the people I work with, the kind of like, I don't know, following your gut. I feel like my gut was developed in the workforce.
Yeah. As someone with a shit ton of student loans,
Yeah.
I like to, try to throw some gratitude towards my corporate experience as the only free tuition I ever got.
Yes. It's also like, I mean, the corporate role that I had before I left to start my own thing was paid really well. Quite frankly, I couldn't have left if they didn't. So again, love you, hate you, corporate world.
I know this is probably hard to quantify, but looking back at that time, can you think of like a moment where you like knew in your bones, I got to make a change. I got to get out of here.
Feel like I had a lot of those moments, and I think they were all kind of like it's like the slow burn where it's like, oh, that hurts. Oh, that hurts. And it's like, that killed me though. And I think like some of those little moments really had to do with like the idea that I felt like I couldn't be myself at work. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have people around me and like my boss who tried to bring more of that out of like, I don't know, tried to pull it out of me, but maybe I was a little resistant to that. But even thinking about like, I have tattoos all along my arms. And I remember when I got my first one that was like visible, I was working my first kind of job out of college. And it was like, oh, you have to cover that up because we're going to this meeting. Like you have to wear long sleeves. So like I was the insane person wearing long sleeves in August in Tennessee.
In Tennessee.
But it also was like, I was like, I'm not going to not get tattoos. Like, that's something I really enjoy. Like, anyway, like, I just always struggled with that, like, idea of like, there was little corporate Jamie who bought all of her fancy dress clothes at the Limited and,
God.
and showed up in clothes that were just like, I just think about clothes all the time. And I'm like, I went through my closet recently and I cleaned out so much of that. And I was like, wow, what a different person I was like pretending to be 7 years ago. And like right now I have bright green hair. Could have never done this. And it's like stupid little things like that were like the little slow burns that kind of led to a bigger picture, which I can definitely go into. But like, what about you? What are the things that like you kind of knew right away?
Well, similarly, I have like a death by 1,000 cuts story, but then I have like a big, like really pivotal
Stab in the
moment.
back.
Yeah. I don't even know how to like frame that. But similarly, my background is in mental health and I still work in that space a lot of the time. And so for me, it became very apparent that those outfits you're talking about from the Limited, like I totally had those. And kind of the moral injury of feeling like you have to put on a costume and a mask every day and taking your true self, who as a young person, you're still trying to get to know and learn to love, and shoving that person down in some dark hole and self-censoring. Like similarly, I can remember one time, like I didn't get a memo because there were literal memos about having to dress like corporate casual instead of business casual. I think that was the delineation on a certain day because somebody from the C-suite was going to be coming through our department. And I didn't know that. And so I was still dressed, probably in a freaking pencil skirt. And they made me sit in a back cube away from the entrance so that I wouldn't be seen.
Oh my God.
It's not like I was wearing like a t-shirt and ripped jeans. I couldn't keep doing it. I remember sitting in my car in the parking deck, like having a panic attack, like trying to just piece myself together enough to walk through the door. And I was also just in an environment where I was hyper aware of not only the microaggressions that I was experiencing as a young woman in corporate America, but those that were happening around me to other people. And it just felt like a toxic soup that I had to wade through every day. So similarly, I learned a lot, free tuition. It gave me an education in how to like learn the business of content strategy, especially within kind of the healthcare space, which is not something I would have learned otherwise. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, overall, not a good fit for young Liz.
Well, and you mentioned too, like it was a good experience for you to learn like how you wanted to kind of do content strategy. And I think for me, in a lot of my corporate roles, similarly, when I was a kid, I was constantly asking why. The answer was always, oh, we've always done it this way.
Oof.
And I'm just like, what?
But it's not working. Why are we doing that?
I know. Yeah. Like, why did you hire me if you've always done it this way? Like, just
Right.
have somebody else do it that way. But anyway, I think it kind of influenced the way I think about brand strategy too, because people, when I was working at this company, weren't seeing marketing as like a holistic sort of approach. They were seeing like design happens over here, messaging happens over here, and ad buying happens over here, and press happens over here. And it's like, oh no, we didn't know what each other were doing. We were duplicating work. We were also just like, it didn't align at all. Like we were all sharing a completely different message, whether that was written, visual, the places we were placing ads, like that really influenced like, oh, there's an opportunity here and it needs to be fixed. Like there are people that can communicate in this building. Why aren't we communicating?
Yeah.
That kind of corporate experience really just influenced highlighted the opportunity really that I was like, oh, that's the thing that I want to fix. And that's the thing I want to do. So yeah. And then I left that job eventually to go to an agency and tried to implement some of that, but it did not happen.
I think I remember that transition for you.
It was like an exciting transition because I basically doubled my salary and I was like, all right, this is the move that I am making with the intention of leaving. So before I dive into that, did you ever make a move like that? You were like, oh, more money so I can leave.
Not in a way that I was super aware of at the time.
Yeah.
So my story, and we'll have to like get in the weeds on this one someday, but my like, oh my God, I have to get out of here moment came when I realized, and people always figure this stuff out, about a significant, I'm talking in the tens of thousands of dollars wage disparity between myself and a male colleague.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, I was already feeling how I was feeling. And then I found out about that and I went through the proper channels.
Little corporate Liz.
And tried to advocate for myself. I did. And it essentially got me nowhere. And I just knew I couldn't keep walking through those doors every day because they had pretty much spelled out how much they value me or didn't value me, I should say. And so that was the catalyst for me to jump ship and say, I'm hiring, somebody to support me and help me learn how to run a business with money that I didn't really have. But that's how I went into business for myself. And in doing that, that's how I double my salary. Not right away, not the first year, but I didn't know that was going to happen. All I knew was that I had to get out of a shitty situation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and like you said, you double your salary in a year. Yeah. I mean, I still haven't gotten back to the place in full transparency where I was when I was at that agency. But you know what? For the sanity that I've gained, I don't care.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the stress I had in that job when I was making the big bucks, if you will, was not worth it, especially during COVID, like when, I was working at home and working for this company. It was like that real identity crisis of like, I'm still not being myself and I'm living in my house and working in my house. And it's like, who am I? Like,
gosh, I didn't even think about that. That has to be even weirder.
Yes. I mean, everybody had that sort of like crisis when they were like, oh, I'm stuck in my house forever. I mean, but when's this going to end? And I think that just really highlighted for me, like, oh, I am not myself right now. Like maybe not even that, but like, I'm not who I want to be right now. Like I feel gross about some of the things that I'm having to do. Yeah.
Every moment of your day is for sale, right?
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes. And you have to choose if you're going to sell it or not.
Yeah, and how much it's going to go for and what your operating costs are going to be, right? Like in order
Yes.
to make that sale. And I'm with you, for me, the bottom line isn't the bottom line. It's important, but I think both of us have experienced these very different ways of working and how our life and our mental health and our physical health is different when we're not in that just trying to fit ourselves into this thing that is not a fit. I mean,
Ooh,
such a difference.
yeah. And I don't think I realized how kind of broken I was in my identity until I started going to therapy during this time and for something totally not related to work. Like I was like, I need to go to therapy to process grief. And then it opened this whole other thing that it was like, oh, work is causing me so much anxiety that I cannot deal with this grief because I'm so pouring myself into this other thing that is so inconsequential. And it was like, oh, yeah, going to therapy was just like, yeah, you really need to figure that one out.
Yeah.
That kind of like gave me the empowerment to explore other opportunities that weren't that corporate identity.
In small ways and in big ways, I've heard lots of examples in this conversation of our kind of minds and bodies screaming at us that this isn't working. This isn't working. And unfortunately, the culture tells us we're not supposed to listen to ourselves or trust ourselves always. And that can be something that you have to learn later on. But I think fortunately, you and I both figured out a way to do some of that listening, whether it was in therapy, which I've been in most of my life and will continue to be.
Yes, same.
Yeah, I think it is in that listening and looking, that trusting yourself, that you have to do that and confront some of those things to have a chance of figuring out what the hell you really want to do and it's going to make you happy.
And I think like some of it, I don't know, some of me leaving the corporate world too, like after kind of having that reckoning of like, oh, my ideas aren't being valued, heard, appreciated, or just like, I'm just a cog in this machine and they're just going to do what they want. I mean, honestly, some of me leaving my corporate job boiled down to ego. I think like I needed to, going back to that, like proving that I can do this, I needed to prove to myself that I could do it. I needed to prove to the people who said you couldn't that I could do it. And like kind of the people that didn't hear my ideas, value my ideas, try to implement any of these things that I truly believed were going to make a difference in their business. It was just like a way for me to prove that like, oh, hey, guess what? I'm doing it. And like, sorry, not sorry.
I love that.
I'm leaving you to do the thing that I'm good at.
I would push back a little bit on that. Like maybe it's a little bit of ego and maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's also just like a very human basic need to feel like what you do matters and that you have an impact in the world around you.
Oh, yeah. It's like the validation that I don't want to admit I need.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe just like a little reframe from your co-host that like, yeah, I know you and I know that you want to see your clients succeed and you know how to do that and you know how to help them with that. So of course you want to be in a situation where you feel like you're able to succeed and do that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you're totally right. It is like, again, wanting to prove people wrong. I'm like, millennials don't need validation. And then I am like, I've got to prove that I can do this.
Feels good though. It feels good when you can put yourself in a situation and I don't know, do the thing you're good at that you actually enjoy doing and help other people. And our businesses are nuanced in a lot of ways, but we both get to do that. And we both didn't get to do that in those other settings.
Yeah, or I think it like was a shallow version of like, we're helping people. And it was like, really, I'm just charging them a lot of money for mediocre work is what I feel like in full transparency.
The shit you're not putting in your portfolio. I feel like that just sums it up.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, how much of that work have we both done even this life and the previous corporate life? Like,
yep.
I mean, you just can't. I think there's a myth out there that like, love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you some days I'm like, I love my job, but wow, do I hate my job.
Yeah. And can we just like normalize that? And that's another example of like the self-discovery and this honesty we're talking about, which is looking inside yourself and just being real with yourself so you can be real with other people. It's okay to not love every client. It's okay to not love every project. As long as like big picture, you're checking the boxes you need for yourself to be well.
Yeah, it's just like sometimes, I mean, like we were talking about money a little bit earlier, and like sometimes you just have to like buckle up and do the work that doesn't really sound that fun or it's not super like fulfilling, but it's a great paycheck. And that's what it's like.
Totally.
I mean, it's not like I get to work with dream clients every single day and
I mean, I do. For any of my clients that are listening, I do.
yeah, I love you all.
No, but I will say, and I'm pretty staunch about this, like, yes, and that doesn't mean you have to go work for Philip Morris. You can do work that lets you pay your power bill and, and pay your rent and stay afloat, and at the same time work with people who are, I think, a value add to the world and not the other way around.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, for anybody listening that is currently in the corporate world, and maybe, I mean, business ownership is not for everyone. Like that's just a fact. And that's okay. I'm not like, hey, everybody quit your job and start a business. Like, no, if it's not for you, it's not for you. But I think if you are working in that corporate role, examining like, okay, am I myself in this job? But also like, what am I outside of this job? Like, what are my interests and things that I'm doing that are giving me life outside of my work? I really struggled with that. And just like, I become my job a lot of times. So like giving yourself space to explore those things. So you do live that like healthy life, like mind, body, all of that. And you're not just pouring all of your eggs into this corporate basket. And let me tell you guys, if your work is calling you family, I'm going to be maybe not the first to tell you that if there's layoffs, sorry, they don't give a fuck.
No,
They're going to protect themselves first. So like you have to have things outside of work. You just do.
absolutely. Oh, I feel like we could talk about this for
I
forever,
know.
but I know we're coming up on time. But I want to walk you guys through something we're going to be adding to the end of each show, which is a segment called Shit You Can't Skip. And really, we know you're busy and we appreciate you listening, but we want to highlight some kind of key takeaways, things you can apply, chew on, experiment with that will be useful to you right now, whatever stage of business you're in.
I'm super excited for this week's Shit You Can't Skip. So, just to quickly sum up our conversation, we really explored the messy parts of self discovery and the parts that you have to do to get to the other side of whatever you're experiencing in that corporate life, that figuring out what's next for you, all of that. This is the sort of self discovery you've just got to dig into. And this is something that I think a lot of my clients miss when they are trying to tell their story. They just think it's not relevant or they're afraid to tell it. So, what is this week's Shit You Can't Skip?
Your story is a business asset, folks, but you don't know what it is until you sit with it and you kind of peel back the layers in a way that Jamie and I did today. And so this week's Shit You Can't Skip is all about asking yourself, why are you the way you are in the best way possible? What are 3 or however many things that have shaped your desire to be a solopreneur? Whether you're just thinking about it, you're still maybe in that corporate space, or maybe you're a new business owner, maybe you're a seasoned business owner, it can still help you to really sit down, maybe journal, maybe just think about what are the things that have shaped your desire to want to live this life. And also reflect on your time in a corporate setting. You can say that you have the best job in the world, and maybe you do. I hope you do. But I think we can all agree that there are times where corporate life is just not it. There are things that can really demoralize you about it because of the way that it's structured. So it's time to get honest about what those might be too, because in doing those 2 things, you can really start to uncover these answers to questions like, well, what kind of business should I build? How should I structure my business? What should my brand, my personal brand be like? These can be some tough questions, but really the answers are going to put you on the right path to where you want to be in your business and your life.
It's so important to reflect on those things that have led you to where you are today, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. And so many times we just kind of forget about those. We just kind of cruise on to the next thing. So take some time this week to reflect. Like Liz said, maybe write it down, maybe just stew on it. There's no right or wrong answers either. So you just got to do it. You got to do the hard stuff.
That's the shit you can't skip. Well, Jamie, this was lovely.
This was lovely. Episode 1 in the bag. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Scope Creep. We're your hosts, Liz Talago and Jamie Cox. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about the best and the worst parts of being a solopreneur and how we navigate the highs and the lows of building businesses. If you loved Scope Creep, leave us a 5-star review. If you didn't love us, then you can just leave.
You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Scope Creep Show. You can find Jamie at JMER Cox and Liz at Liz Talago, Liz Talago. If you have a topic you'd love for us to discuss or a question you want answered, you can always email us at scopecreepshow@gmail.com.